Okay, and the next step I want to show you is the so-called dodge and burn. This simply means that you're going to be lightening and darkening areas of the image. So burning means making areas darker and dodging means making areas lighter. I just want to say one thing before I show you my favorite method for dodge and burn. There are many different ways to do dodge and burn in Photoshop. Most people would probably use the dedicated tools for it, so they are here. This one here is the burn tool, and in the same menu you have the dodge tool. I do use them from time to time, but the reason why I don't love this particular way of doing it is because it can create some discoloration in the shadows, and I just think other ways are better. So I show you my favorite method, which is using curves. So to do this, it's actually very, very simple. You're just going to create a new adjustment layer. So go down here to the symbol and click on curves. Okay, I'm going to call this layer highlights, just so I can remember what I'm doing. And then simply go to the middle of this line here, exactly in the middle of this grid, and pull it up a little bit. This is no exact science, just do it, a little bit so the whole image looks a little brighter. You can check before and after. I leave it at that. And then create another of those layers. So go back down here, curves. I call this shadows. It really doesn't matter what you call your layers, you just want to keep a reference for yourself. And then you do the same thing, but you do it the other way around. So you just pull this down here at the grid, a little bit darker. Let's see. Yeah, I'm fine with that. Okay, so now we have these two curves, but of course you can see that they have been applied to the whole image, which is what we don't want at the moment. These white things here, they are sort of automatically created masks, but at the moment it's showing everything, so you can simply invert this mask to hide all the adjustments. So simply click on Ctrl-I if you're on a Windows PC, or Command-I on a Mac. Okay, and now you can see we've hidden the two curves adjustments behind these black masks. Now, let me first explain to you what I'm actually trying to do with the dodge and burn. Obviously, you can see in this picture there are already highlights and shadows. For example, you have highlights here on the forehead, here on the nose. There are some quite prominent ones on the cupid's bow. You see highlights on the hair. And in the same way, you see black shadows here. The cheekbones are usually shaded. Then you have some darker areas here by the eye. So you don't technically have to do anything if you don't want to. The reason I like to use dodge and burn is because it gives you a much more artistic and painterly look to your portraits that can be really beautiful. I'm just going to show you a little bit how I would do it. So I'm going to start with the highlights. And simply now I pick a brush tool. Make sure the brush is very soft. And I'm going to make it a little bit larger. And now I'll check that the opacity is fairly low. Let's say maybe 35 is good for now. I'll also lower the flow a little bit, just so the brush isn't quite as reactive. So before you do anything, just make sure you've set your brush color to white. So we actually reveal what's under this black mask. And then have a look where you want to add highlights. For example, I love to add some highlights on the cheekbone. So let me show you how I do that. Now the brush is maybe a bit too transparent. So just brush over it a few times wherever you want more highlights. I like to do it on the hair actually as well. So at first you think nothing much is happening, but you will see later in the before and after, it's quite a big difference in the end. I also love adding some highlights here, even though there is already a highlight. But I quite like to emphasize those in my portraits. I also like sometimes adding a bit more highlight to the waterline. This is already quite light here, but that's fine. And you could also even add it in the eyes. Here you have to be a little bit careful not to overdo it, obviously. I'm just going to do it a bit more now so you can really see the effect. And then just add highlights wherever you want. If you've ever done drawing, this will really help you because you're basically trying to create a more three-dimensional look. So in drawing, wherever it's white is going to look like it's coming towards you, whereas the darker areas look like they are further away from you. So the more you add these highlights and shadows, the more plastic and three-dimensional the face starts to look. Let me just show you the before and after of this curves layer. So that's before and that's after with the highlight. Okay, then let's also do a bit of burning just for contrast. So go on your shadows layer or whatever you called it. Keep the brush on white. And then you can make it darker wherever you want. For example, I sometimes add a bit more shading here under the cheekbone. You could do the same here under this bone. See, because there's already a dark shadow here, so it's not going to look unnatural if you just make that a little bit more pronounced. And you can see that you can really sculpt bodies and faces with this method. As I said, you really don't have to. This is totally optional. I just like to do it to give it a particular artsy look that I really like. For example, in this picture, I will also do it on the flowers. So you see they're looking a bit flat, and you could just, emphasize the light and shade on the flowers. This is not something you do in a few minutes. You can take half an hour or so and really start to paint on these flowers and make it a bit more three-dimensional looking. Let me put these two in a folder so I can show you before and after. So that's before we did any changes, and that's after. And obviously you've seen I've only done it now for a couple of minutes. So the effect is very subtle, but you can really take your time with this and sculpt as much as you want. Now there's one more way to do this I want to show you. And I use this quite a lot for the eyes. And sometimes also for example, the Cupid's bow or other highlights. It's even easier actually. So you just create a new layer. Click on the plus sign here. Again, I call it highlights just so I don't get confused. And then stay on the brush tool. Make sure the color is set to white. By the way, if there's a funky color here for some reason, you can always just hit D on your keyboard. It will go back to default colors. And now you see black is in front, but I want white. So hit X. That will bring the white to the foreground. Great. Now I'm going to make it quite low opacity. Zoom in a bit. And I'm just going to switch off the previous highlights. Let's pretend we haven't done anything. And let's say you wanted to add a bit of highlight to the Cupid's bow or whatever, to the nose. Now you can use the actual brush in white. This is going to look totally crazy for a minute, but stay with me. So you could add the highlight here, then maybe a bit of a highlight in the eye. So this, of course, looks completely unnatural. But what you can do then is change the blend mode. You can play around with it. I always like luminosity. And then apply a filter to make it a bit less sharp. So go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. Just have a look until when it sort of melts into the skin, maybe around here. Yeah. And then that's still too much, of course, so you can now lower the opacity to your liking. Maybe somewhere around here. Yeah, so you can see this is a very quick and super easy way to add some highlights. And you can do exactly the same with shadows, just use a black brush and the rest is the same. So the brush tool is another way you can easily add shadows and highlights. However, I still always prefer the curves method that we used in the beginning because it really gives you quite natural looking results and doesn't affect the colors too much. And that's it. That's how I do dodge and burn in my portraits.